Welcome everyone to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and give this a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you'll know right when a new story is uploaded. Please enjoy the first subscriber submitted real-life encounter. This is a scary one, among the more frightening I've heard, so I think y'all will enjoy it. If you have an encounter you'd like to share, please send me a message with the email in the description. So this story comes from a fella named Mike. He starts his experience this way. Matt, thank you very much for being interested in reading about my Bigfoot story. Well, you're welcome, Mike. I'm glad you trust me to do it. Use my name if you want. I'm a little nervous that someone I know will hear, but I say, oh well. I'm not getting any younger, and I have a terminal illness that can take me at any time, so I figure, why not? There are so many people coming forward with their own experiences, so I figured why not share mine. This happened to me in May 1981, when I was 14 years old. But I will do my best to remember as much as possible. Okay, I will start from the beginning. Ever since I was born, I was brought into the woods with my grandparents to their cabin, located near a beautiful freshwater lake. The cabin itself was basically a wooden tent. There were the 4 outside walls with a dividing wall between the kitchen area and the 2 bedrooms, and a wall between the 2 of them. There wasn't a ceiling in the cabin that would hide the inside of the roof. We had 1 propane light fixture in the kitchen, almost over the table, and a small-sized propane stove oven. There was an old cook stove that was our only source of heat during the early spring and late fall. The odd time that we ran out of propane, we'd cook on the old wood stove, and for some reason, the food seemed to taste better. Our version of running water was to grab the 2 buckets from inside the cabin and run down to the lake, which was about 200 feet from the cabin, then fill them on the end of the dock and carry them back to the cabin while trying not to spill any. Of course, there was no indoor plumbing, so we had to use the outhouse, which I hated because I was petrified of snakes. I had to kill one that got into the outhouse somehow, so I always thought about that every time I had to go. I started swimming when I was 3 years old, with the help of my mother at first, and then with my mother close behind me just in case. Once I hit 10 years old, I could finally go down to the lake and swim on my own. It was an accomplishment I was proud of, and boy could I swim. My grandpa told me that I was part fish. The odd time that we went walking through the woods, my grandfather said that the only thing to be afraid of in the woods was yourself, because our minds can play games on itself. My grandpa bought me my first fishing rod and reel when I was 5. Then I was old enough to go fishing in the boat with my grandparents. I loved every minute of it, and I still think of the fun we had all those years ago. Every chance I had, I wanted to go to the cabin. Every weekend, spring holiday, summer vacation, and fall holiday, I wanted to be at the cabin. My sisters and brother didn't have any interest in the cabin, so our trips there were cut short. That really upset me, and I swore that as soon as I turned 16 and could drive, I would be headed to the cabin every chance I could. I was 14 years old when this encounter occurred. In Canada, every year on the 3rd weekend of May, we have a holiday commemorating Queen Victoria's birthday for some reason. Probably because we are a member of the British Commonwealth. Before the holiday weekend, my best friend Mark and his father had planned on going to their cabin to open it up for the season and asked if I wanted to tag along. Silly question, because I was always ready to go there with them. Seeing that it's a far distance from Ottawa, and it was a long weekend, we left after lunch. I had to skip school, of course, for the afternoon on Friday so we could get there before dark. Sometimes we would have to clear trees or branches that had fallen onto the private road that went to the cabin, which was off of the main highway. They had a locked gate at the entrance to access their property. We made it to the cabin just before sundown, unloaded the coolers, sleeping bags, mattresses, and the rest of our gear. Once we checked out the cabin and the area around it, Mark's dad went inside to light a fire in the wood stove and light the propane lights in the cabin. Mark and I went back out to remove a few of the plywood window covers that we screwed onto the window frames the previous fall to protect the windows from being broken over the winter months, while we were closing up the cabin for the winter. After removing a couple of the covers, we were able to open the windows to air out the cabin, as well as being able to allow the sun to shine in the following morning. Once this was finished, we stayed inside and kicked back for the night and discussed the plans for the following day. The next morning we woke up at around 5:30 a.m. The sun was just coming over the horizon, and it looked like we were going to have a beautiful spring day ahead. Mark's dad made some coffee and started cooking breakfast. After a very large breakfast, we got to work removing the rest of the window coverings, putting them into the shed. Then we cleaned up all of the branches. Some of them were quite large that had fallen from the trees over the winter that were close to the cabin. Next, we helped Mark's dad unload the generator so he could hook it up. It was too heavy and awkward for him to do it by himself. They never left the generator in the shed for the winter because it would have been stolen by the thieves who rode around on their snowmobiles checking out cabins. Before we knew it, it was lunchtime, and believe it or not, we were hungry after that huge breakfast. So we went in and made some sandwiches. We talked about what was next on the agenda, and Mark's dad said that there really wasn't much left to do, so he told us that we could have the rest of the day off and do whatever we wanted to. He was going to hop on his four-wheeler and ride around to some of the other cabins, which were too far away to walk to, and see if some of his friends came up for the weekend as well. Their cabins were located around 6 miles away through the woods and the many old logging roads and snowmobile trails. I can only remember a couple of stories my grandfather told me about his experiences working up in this area. I know that today's generation could never do that kind of work that was done logging through the mountains. These days, nobody really has to work that hard, because we have manufactured all type of machinery to do the bulk of the work for us. I can remember him saying that he had to walk miles sometimes to reach the cabins where they lived so that they could be fed a good hot meal, have a smoke, and then bunk to get some well-deserved sleep. It was always dark by the time they reached the cabin, and he told me about the timber wolves that would pace them in the woods about 20 to 30 feet away. The wolves had their own little trails through the woods, and they used to follow the men to their cabins. Oddly enough, the wolves did nothing to cause any of the men to become fearful of them. When I was really young and up until I was 18 years old, every time I would go anywhere for the evening or overnight, he always told me to watch out for the loup-garou, or werewolf in English. I never did have the opportunity to find out if he wasn't telling me something about that topic or not. I'll always wonder about that the rest of my life. I didn't tell him about my Bigfoot experience. I don't know why I didn't, but he did ask me why I wasn't going fishing or into the woods as much as I used to. I guess he thought it was because I had started getting involved in the drug scene the year before, and I stopped going to the country to spend time with my grandparents for a few years. I will always regret that for the rest of my life. I should mention that my grandfather was born into a French family in northern Ontario, and only learned how to speak English from some of the men he had worked with during his logging years. Now, going back to the trip that we're on, it wasn't difficult to convince Mark's dad to let us go fishing for the rest of the day, seeing as we completed our to-do list quicker than expected. He agreed without hesitation, but Mark decided he didn't want to go because he doesn't like to fish from shore. So he just wanted to lay back and bum around. The ice should have started to melt away from the shore of the lakes in that area by now, So I grabbed my new rod and reel combo that I had purchased from some of the money I was able to save from shoveling snow that previous winter, and some of the money I had received for my birthday a couple of weeks earlier. I also grabbed some sandwiches for later, a couple of soft drinks, the shotgun I brought with me, and headed out on my way. The reason for the shotgun was because spring had sprung, and the bears were waking up from their long winter's nap, looking for some food to replenish some of the weight they had lost, and I didn't want to be lunch or a snack for one of them. I headed into the woods on one of those bike trails to one of the many lakes in the area. It took me about an hour and a half to get to the lake that I was going to. It wasn't out of the ordinary for me to go into the woods by myself, because we lived in the country. Being used to the woods, and I had been in their cabin and that particular lake numerous times. We still had my grandparents' cabin back then, but it wasn't being used much for a few years. But I really liked going to Mark's cabin in the meantime, because it was the only cabin in that area, and it was so remote that we could pretty much do anything we wanted to do, without worry about someone coming upon us. I reached the lake around 2 p.m. I set myself up beside a beautiful big maple tree, tied a lure on the end of my line, and started casting with the new rod. It was awesome. The reel was so smooth when reeling in the lure. Too bad the fish weren't cooperating. About an hour or so of casting and trying different lures without success. I tried to switch to a hook, worm, and a bobber to possibly luck in a lazy trout swimming by. I propped my fishing rod up on a Y stick that I cut off of a nearby tree, then sat down against the maple tree beside the lake. I guess it was pushing around 3:30 p.m. when I thought I heard movement behind me in the woods. It wasn't very loud or moving very fast, so I wasn't alarmed that it was anything of a threat. After a couple of minutes or so, whatever was in the woods behind me started to sound much louder and was moving a little quicker towards me than it had been before. Suddenly, a wicked stench seemed to be coming out of the thick brush near the area where I was hearing something. There was a little bit of a breeze blowing in my direction, and I figured that was why I was smelling that horrible smell. I thought it was going to be a black bear coming to the lake for a drink, or to try grabbing a fish or two in the shallow water on the opposite side of the lake where I was fishing. I grabbed the shotgun in case I needed it. Now I was getting nervous about what it could be, but like I said, I thought it was going to be a bear because of all the wildlife coming alive in the woods. That's what I had in the back of my mind, especially giving off that disgusting smell. I was lucky that the tree I was leaning on was big, really big, and it sheltered most of my body from whatever it was creeping out in the woods. I could start to make out a figure of what appeared to be a large man, dressed in something that appeared to be all black, a very large humanoid on 2 feet. It was getting close to the edge of the woodline, about 25 feet from me. Then it walked out of the woods, and I froze stiff. Oh my goodness, what in the world is that? It was somewhere around 7.5 to 8 feet tall and had to be 500 pounds or more. At this point, I was 6'2" and pushing 200 pounds, so I thought I could have a good guess about its size. I snuggled up to that tree as tight as possible and tried to be as quiet as possible. I had grabbed the shotgun that I had loaded before I left from the cabin. I thought the creature could hear me breathing because I could feel my heart pounding so hard and so fast, and I knew I had to be breathing heavy. The creature almost made it to the lake before it noticed me. I guess the small breeze that was blowing towards me was why it didn't pick up my scent and realize that I was there sooner. It stopped, turned its whole body towards me. It looked like it didn't have a neck for it to turn its head, so it looked right at me. It appeared to be surprised initially, but that look changed quickly to an angry, horrifying look. especially when it noticed the shotgun. A very angry look. It let out a couple of loud grunts and blew and snarled at me. It started to growl, and a growl that went right through me with every breath I took. It was flipping and rolling its lips around, like flashing its teeth at me. I couldn't make out what its teeth looked like because I was staring at its canines, which stood out of its mouth and looked like they were ready to rip me apart. The color of its hair was as black could be. It even looked like something was grooming it regularly. The sun was really shining off the hair that covered its body. It was built like some of the largest bodybuilders I've ever seen. It was so toned that it looked like it had muscles on top of its muscles. The outline of the creature's head appeared to be that of a huge silverback gorilla, but it had a short snout, and the width of it in its head appeared to be similar to that of a Rottweiler, with the remaining part of its face, eyes, and forehead looking like a monkey, except for the brow ridge that stuck out. It was very paralyzing to look at, and it scared the living crap out of me so much that I couldn't even move. I'm pretty sure this is when I wet myself. Literally, I couldn't move. I've been told by a couple of supposed researchers on YouTube that a creature from my encounter was a Type 3 Sasquatch called a Gugwe. Apparently, there are 4 types of Bigfoot. The Gugwe has been known to be very aggressive, confrontational, and unpredictable. Also, they have been known to attack for no apparent reason. As for killing, I don't think anyone who's been killed by one of these has ever been able to tell anyone about it. Anyway, at this point, I thought I was in trouble because it bent over even more facing me, placing one fist on the ground just like a linebacker playing football. It really looked like it was going to attack. I said to myself that I'm jumping into that freezing lake as soon as it takes one step towards me if it was going to, regardless of how cold the water would have been. I knew that the shotgun I had wouldn't do anything other than anger it even more than it was. So I put the rifle down on the opposite side of me without even thinking about it. When I put the rifle down, it almost looks like its face changed a little bit, and it seemed like it wasn't so angry. After what seemed like many minutes, which was probably in reality 15 to 20 seconds, it stood up again. Not straight up, because it was hunched over a little, like when I first saw it walking towards me. It let off a couple of more growls and grunts, then to my amazement, it turned its body away from me, looked at me once again as if to say, "Don't even think about shooting me," and then walked back into the woods. I didn't dare turn to the side of the tree to watch it leave in case it changed its mind and come back to kill me. I started crying and shaking intensely for a few minutes, and then I started to settle down. It was probably 5 minutes or so before I looked around the tree to see if the creature had actually left, and I didn't hear it anymore. But the smell just seemed to hang around the area for quite some time. Then I grabbed my backpack, the shotgun, and my fishing rod and started running towards the cabin. I didn't even take the worm or bobber off my line or fasten the hook to my rod. So, needless to say, there was no bobber or hook left on the line. By the time I could finally see the cabin, I dropped everything that I was holding and fell to the ground on my hands and knees. I had run faster and further than I thought I was capable of. I broke down and started to vomit and cry. It was by far the scariest experience of my life to date. Even though that lake is a fair piece away from the cabin, I have never returned to that area again, nor will I ever go back. Oddly enough, there had never been any sign of a Bigfoot on that property. Not that we would have known anything different at that time, nor any damage done to anything. When Mark's dad did bring their dogs to the cabin, they never seemed to be bothered by anything, because they were always happy. They kept busy running through the woods most of the time, chasing squirrels and anything else that got their attention. I didn't say anything about my encounter to Mark or his dad, but Mark did ask me why I had returned to the cabin so soon, because it was usually dark whenever I would get back. They did notice that I wasn't myself for the rest of the weekend and why I didn't want to go fishing again while I was there. I just said that the fish weren't biting yet and that the ice was still too close to the shore. I didn't say anything to my friends or family about this encounter until I was almost 30, because I didn't think anyone would have believed me, and I didn't want to be the laughingstock of the town. After my experience, I never went camping in a tent again, or in a trailer or cabin that didn't have indoor plumbing, because I wouldn't go outside after dark alone or unarmed. I felt I looked pretty childish, seeing as how I'm a fairly large guy that before my encounter was never afraid of anything in the woods. Like my grandfather had always told me, the only thing to be afraid of in the woods was yourself. But after that afternoon, I would always make sure that I had a rifle with me that I had purchased on my 16th birthday. Well, that was my Bigfoot experience. It probably sounds similar to other stories that people have experienced in their lives, especially since people are coming out and telling their stories more often than ever, because the public is finally starting to grasp that Bigfoot really does exist. That is one afternoon that I will never be able to forget. Thank you for letting me share this experience with all of you, and I hope that more skeptical people will start opening up their minds to finally considering that these cryptid encounters and experiences are true and really do happen to people, because there are way too many of us coming forward with similar experiences of their own. Well, Mike, thanks again for that awesome experience and the backstory about what led up to it and coming forward with it. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch everyone in the next video.